I would like to open the Tuesday, December 13th, regular planning board meeting and public hearing. It is 6:02. We are being videotaped and sent out live over the town website. And we're being audio recorded. First up, for administrative items, is High Ridge Road, file number 22-007 PAC, requested by Eric Raposo to discuss a flexible frontage plan consisting of 3 lots, map 42, lots 1, T, 7, and 8.
Good evening, Sean Lee, Chinook East Engineers and Consultants for Eric and Julie Raposa, who are here tonight. They own this house at the end of High Ridge Road, which is lot 1T. They purchased, this lot is now, has been cut. They purchased the back half of what is this lot here, which is 7 and 8. And that has frontage, it's hard to tell on this. There's a cul-de-sac at the end of High Ridge Road, and it has frontage at the end of High Ridge Road. It has about 50 feet of frontage on the end of High Ridge Road. Their current lot has about 209 feet of frontage on High Ridge Road. What they're looking to do is get 2 flexible frontage lots off the cul-de-sac, keeping the existing house and making the house, reducing the frontage back to 109 feet, and increasing the area under the flexible frontage bylaw, but also having 2 lots of 6 and 7 acres each for the remaining land out here in this parcel. This property line is not correct, as shown on the plan there. And they're looking to get 2 lots with 50 feet of frontage with a common driveway to service those 2 lots. The existing house, which they own, will have the use of the existing driveway, and that basically, the shape does not change. I don't know if we have that on, yeah. We had come, about a year ago, we had come in about extending High Ridge Road to create lot frontage in that parcel. The board was not really thrilled with that idea at the time. But we already have, High Ridge Road is already 2,200 feet long. It's a very nice road. It's one of the better subdivisions in the town, I believe. So what we're looking to do is not extend the road, but just create frontage on the cul-de-sac. I don't know if you have the plan. Okay, so what we're looking to do is the existing house that they own. They own this land here. What they were looking to do is create 2 50-foot frontage lots, put a lot here, and get 2 buildable lots. One 6 3/4 acres, one of 7.8 acres. This one has some significant wetlands in the back. This one is predominantly upland. And they would service a common drive depending on acceptability of this kind of configuration. Basically splitting the lot coming off of High Ridge Road to service both the buildable areas. So we'll have one more curb cut than the existing now. There is a 50-foot access easement that was created during the subdivision process to access this back land, but nothing has ever happened with that.
And you're also cutting off the house that's on the junction of Pine Hill Road and Old Pine Hill Road?
No, that one has already been cut out.
It's already cut out?
Yeah, that was a Form A plan that was done about a year and a half ago for Mr. Trapillo. And he maintained this landlocked piece in the back. The house lot is out here. He cut out that house lot. It's about 2.5 acres, I believe. That has been sold. The proposals have picked up this land, which abuts their property, from Mr. Trapillo. And now they're just looking to get 2 additional lots out of it. Total of 3 with 2 additions. All under the flexible frontage.
So the first slide shows it all combined.
Right, this has been cut off about a year and a half ago. This configuration that you see here is not correct. It's not actually the property line.
Right.
This is correct, the end of the cul-de-sac for the existing house lot, which is a little over 2.5 acres. This land in here is what we're talking about. It's almost this shape and not quite. This is kind of wrong here.
So, did you provide this, or did we?
No.
Yeah, but that's the GIS off the town website.
Okay.
I just provided it for the sake of the lot.
It was a little confusing.
Yeah, it is.
There, it looks like the cul-de-sac is an arrow, but,
Yeah, well, they're all like that. For some reason, all the GIS now, all the cul-de-sacs are kind of oddly
They
shaped.
don't
and
bother to
I
do
don't know
it
why
right.
that is.
it's
It
quicker.
never used to be like that, but there is a real cul-de-sac, just like here, there's a real cul-de-sac. This one actually does have one. But there are a couple others that, if you go throughout the town, that show up kind of strangely.
So, how much wetlands on lot 3?
I believe,
Can't really read it.
about half the lot is wet. Let's go through one more slide. One more. Okay, yeah, so, to read that number. So out of the 7.8 acres, there would be 2 3/4 acres approximately.
It looks pretty straightforward.
We were just wondering if the board had any problems because due to the High Ridge Road, Wayne High Ridge Road, and basically there'd be one, like say, common drive that comes in field off on each lot surface, so we don't have 3 curb cuts that feed each other.
So, how long is High Ridge, do you know?
2,200 feet, give or take. What to do? Has 22 lots on it.
Do you know when it was built?
It was in the early 80s, the late 70s, early 80s, there was some configuration. It's a very mature subdivision if you drive up there.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
an island in the middle of the cul-de-sac, but most of these have all mature trees on it now.
Yeah, yeah.
They're all very nice houses.
It's a very nice place.
Yeah, it's a very nice subdivision.
Board, any comments, questions?
Sean, I only have one question, and if we go back to the proof plan, I mean, I think this meets the proof plan that was, the prior plan showed full.
Is this
No,
what you're
if you go back to the prior subdivision, that proposed subdivision, it had 4 lots. This is now 2 lots on a larger area.
Right.
That, on this plan that was just a year ago, it's a different lot.
Configuration?
Yeah, not
We
only
came out
is it a
with-
lot configuration, it's a different piece of land.
Right.
And on the subdivision, there was a different owner to the east.
Correct. That was Mr. Pillow, I think, on the, oh no, that was Mr. Remar on to the east. When we did a survey, we started looking at the title, we found out there was the way the lot was originally configured, this
Right, there's a-
across, but this piece actually went with it. So when we did the survey, the original one was just a conceptual plan to say, can we try to do this? Before we spent a lot of money on survey and engineering and other things, we were trying to figure out. So when they purchased the property, the consideration was, okay, we have some frontage, but we found out there's a piece here, this dash line here.
Yep.
That is part of the High Ridge subdivision that's not included on the assessor's map for some reason, and I'm not sure why that is. Other than, I think, the original survey, there's some ancient deeds from the mid-1800s that very clearly show a configuration. That, you know, like if the original subdivision of High Ridge did this, but actually does this.
Are there walls along that line?
No, there's piles of stones. This is one of the few places in Westport you don't find any walls out in the middle of the woods.
That's strange. I don't have any further questions, thank you.
The only question I have is, you know, if this was originally approved in the early 80s, you think?
Yeah.
There wasn't a requirement for a 1,200-foot dead end, right?
Correct.
And so how many houses is on this dead end? And this is gonna add 2 more, right?
There's 22 houses that are serviced by High Ridge Road. There's 2 lots on the corner of High Ridge and Pine Hill that have driveways on Pine Hill, but they have frontage on.
Right.
So, not counting those, there's 22, so this would make 24 with the house on each.
does this have to be approved? Do they have a homeowners association?
Well, what
Is it
we
a
need to
private
do,
road?
we're
or
looking,
a
this is
public
just a
road?
pre-app consult for conceptual, to see if, before we go too far, you know, spending a lot of money, doing a lot of things. I mean, they already spent a lot of money to get to this point, but if this wasn't acceptable to the board, we didn't want to be chasing rainbows, I guess.
To me, it looks, from, if you disregard what's on the rest of the road,
Right.
this looks fine. Question in my mind is, who owns the road? Is it an accepted
It's a
road?
public road,
It's a public road.
public road.
And is there a homeowners association or homeowners?
Well, by the bylaws and by this common drive, we would have to have an association for the common drive for these two lots.
Right.
I don't know if this would have to be included necessarily because it has a current driveway that they would continue using. It wouldn't use the common drive. But these two lots would have the association. I would imagine that's the way it would be set up.
Anybody else? Michael, Amy?
Okay.
Looks
All right.
okay as long as
Okay, thank you.
the neighbors are okay, so,
Have a nice night. Have a Merry Christmas.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is Coastal Healing, file number 20-007 SP-RM. Review of the number of appointments for non-medical retail sales, partial release of surety.
Hi, my name is Dave Bullis, representing Coastal Healing tonight. Basically, the summary is that the most customers we've had in one day is 33, which amounts to 3 customers per hour. We presented some charts that show hourly customers and how it gets spread out. And the long and short of it is that at no time did we go below 30 open parking spaces per day at any time.
So Michael and I have discussed this, and our recommendation is to remove condition number 16 within the decision for the planning board issued. Since marijuana sales for recreational has been going on for the past month, and regarding data, it doesn't seem that appointments are necessary, because even without appointments, the number of parking and traffic isn't hazardous to Route 6 or to the facility and their parking. They still have more than half of their parking available at all times.
Yeah, I've driven by and I've never seen more than a few cars out front, so I don't think that our concern was, I think in the beginning when there were no other marijuana places, you'd be inundated in having cars park on Route 6, so I don't think that's gonna happen. So you're recommending that we remove the requirements of Article 6, or?
Remove the condition in the special permit, condition number 16, that requires the need for scheduled appointments.
I think that's certainly warranted. Anybody else?
You want a motion?
I do.
Based on the planner's recommendation, I recommend we remove condition number 16 on for Coastal Healing.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's unanimous.
Now, is there also a request in terms of surety?
Yeah.
Yes, so I was in touch with Diego this morning, and the only outstanding item on this project is the resurfacing of State Road right in front of the facility. And the quote that was provided to me from Diego was for $19,000 and change, but more close to 20,000. And we have surety held on this project right now for 50,000. And so they're requesting that they get 30,000 back, and we keep the 20,000 in surety for the finishing of the resurfacing of Route 6. I would recommend that we give some of the surety back, because I think that we are holding too much for everything that's been done on the project. I'm not, Mass DOT will allow for the resurfacing to take place in the spring, and I would say maybe hold 25,000 and give back 25, just as a little contingency for the price fluctuation. If there is one from now until the spring, they can get it done.
You want a motion, Mr. Chair?
I do.
Based on planner's recommendation, I move that we release 25,000 of the 50,000 surety that we are holding on coastal healing
Second.
to provide for the remaining resurfacing requirements.
Second that.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Brookwood Drive Solar, file number 19-005 SP, regarding the surety deposit of $150,000.
Hi, good evening, Mr. Chairman, board members. Michael Jima representing Borrego. Borrego would like you to release the surety, or at least reduce the amount of the surety. As your consulting engineer advised in the latest report, all of the punch list items were completed to their satisfaction. The only thing remaining is for the seed mix to grow next spring, and that's also a condition of the federal permit, so it's going to happen one way or the other. And so we would ask your consideration to both release the surety and recommend the site as being closed out.
Okay, planners?
So Michael and I have discussed this at a good amount. I have corresponded with Derek of SW Cole, and him and I took a site visit on November 7th to the site. He provided a report saying that all the punch list items have been completed. The only thing remaining is the vegetation growth that obviously won't take place until the spring and the summer of next year. We do have a $150,000 check that we have not deposited yet. And it is staff recommendation that, according to Derek's email, he said that about 25,000 would be pretty much sufficient to hold in the event that we had to rehydro seed and, have new vegetation growth if it didn't take. So I think a common ground for Borrego and the board would be to hold 50,000, so at least we have double what we would need to bring that site up for the growth and the hydro seed if it didn't take, and then give Borrego back $100,000 since we're holding a decent amount. I think that would suffice.
So, can I ask a question? Have you talked with them whether it's easier for us to return one check and get a new check, or to deposit their check and return 100?
I think it would be easier to return the check that's not deposited and then have them sign the Form G for the 50,000 and get a new check made out for 50,000 and deposit that.
Do you want a motion, Mr. Chair?
I would like a motion.
Mr. Chair, could I
to
ask a
separately-
question?
Go ahead.
Amy, how much area are we talking to hydro seed, if it need be?
The entire site.
How many acres would that be?
Top of my head, I can't recall how many acres that project is.
It's at least 28 to 30.
Okay, because we did get quotes that just the seed is 1,200 an acre. So that's just the seed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going by, I requested Derek to give me a rough estimate of what it would take to to bring that site up to compliance and you know, hydro seed and get it up to
Yeah.
good growth and,
Well, I'm just bringing that up just so, to the point of, to hold the 50,000, it would be adequate, but it's
Right,
not
right.
like we're.
Yeah, I think Manny's got a good point, because assuming that it's gonna be 100% successful, and that you're not gonna have to do it in some places more than once, I think is, you know, we may need to, they may need to go back and hydro seed a second time in some places. But, so I think the $50,000 is a good number. I would move, Mr. Chair, that, that we return the undeposited surety check of $150,000 upon presentation of a replacement check of $50,000 for the remaining punch list item of hydro seeding.
May I ask a question too? Borrego's also willing to provide a bond if you'd rather have that, or if you would accept that. It would certainly be easier for them to do it that way.
I think we would prefer to have cash. But, you know, if it were a subdivision, you would have the right to do a bond instead of the thing. But I think from the town standpoint, it's so cumbersome to have to call the bond. And then the town has to do the work. What we're assuming is they're gonna do the work and get your check, get your money back, so.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, they're willing to work with you on this.
Yep.
They're trying to make it as cost-effective as possible for themselves also, though.
It is definitely our preference to have the check, and have the cash.
I think Dayton Ideen has something.
Mr. Chairman, I need to get the gentleman's last name, I couldn't hear it.
Oh, sure, yep. Giaimo, Jaimo, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
So I made a motion.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, next is the 2023 zoning bylaw amendments. I think there's people here for this, otherwise I would have delayed it till the end, but, so,
That's fine.
no, we can go ahead with it.
Go ahead with it, okay. Okay, so we have a handful of zoning bylaw amendments that have been requested by the planning board and the zoning board of appeals. And I'll just start with the first set of bylaw revisions, which is section 8.6, that is for flexible frontage. This request was made because there was some confusion about the language as to what was actually being measured, whether it was dwelling unit density or what is essentially like lot density. And so in order to avoid some of those confusions about what's being measured here, this section spells out what is being measured in later on in the section 8.6.4. There's a formula for it, and it's not actually a measurement of density of dwelling units, but the relationship of lots to lot size and upland of those lots. So we're just fixing up some of the language in this bylaw to reduce some of those, reduce some of that confusion in their requests for flexible frontage. So should I read through the?
Yeah, could you read through it and
Revisions
say what
themselves.
you're crossing out and what you're putting in?
Sure, so section 8.6.1, purpose and intent. The purpose and intent of this section is to encourage, and we're striking out, reduction in potential residential development density, and clarifying that we're encouraging an increase of rear lot area while reducing future vehicular trips, road congestion, demand for public services, so on and so forth in that section. And then when we close out the purpose and intent section, I will start here. So to achieve this, the planning board may issue a special permit to allow a reduction in the otherwise applicable frontage requirements on a public way, a way approved by the planning board under the subdivision control law, or a private way that the planning board votes to determine has been in existence since prior to the effective date of the subdivision control law in the town of Westport and has adequate width, grade, and construction within the meaning of GL 41, section 81L for the proposed development for one or more of the plots proposed. And this end section is what we're proposing the change rate here. You can see it struck through on the board up there. In exchange for a corresponding striking out reduction in development density and inserting increase in lot size and upland and reliance upon common driveways if applicable. The next section in section 8.6 that has been proposed to be revised is frontage reduction, striking ratios in proportion to dwelling density reduction. Again, because the formula here is not for dwelling unit density. So then in the text, a special permit may be issued so that the required lot frontage is decreased as a function of average, again, striking out density decrease, inserting lot size and upland increase in equal proportions to a minimum of 50 feet of frontage, based on those formulas that I have referenced, which we are not proposing any revisions to. And that is all that we have for the flexible frontage piece.
Okay, so let's talk about these changes. In the first paragraph of 8.6.1, I'm not sure that crossing out the reduction in potential residential development density and replacing it with an increase of rear lot area. Is a good trade-off. I wonder if it wouldn't be easier to define what residential development density is in the definitions section in the front of the zoning bylaw.
We could also take that approach.
Because without really understanding all this stuff, if you're just a person trying to divide a few acres, I don't know if they understand what an increase of rear lot area means. And it may not be the rear of the lot that's increased, it could be the front of the lot. But I would bend to the will of the board, so.
Well, this is an article we should definitely revise, whether it's these words or, but some words where we make it clear that the words don't match the formula that we provide to applicants in the very body of the document. So it says, formula is, you gotta create bigger lots if we if we allow you to reduce the frontage, you have to build fewer lots than what you could do. And the words talk about, you've gotta reduce the density and we've had examples where people would come in and say, well, I could build duplex houses and I'm gonna build single houses and therefore I'll reduce the density, and you've gotta give me the reduced frontage, which is not the purpose here. So I think this is, whether it's exactly this words, but this is a fix that we need to make. Mr. Chairman, I'd also make a suggestion that if we can perhaps lay the administrative items and take up the public hearing that most of the audience is here for.
Yeah, well, we have other things here too, and the reason that there are people that have come to hear about the zoning amendments, and they
Okay.
know that it's in this section of the agenda. And,
Wordsmithing may take some time.
yes. So maybe we can
And this is-
wordsmith out of the
This is the
public meeting.
sausage making part of our job.
So, if people would like to do this after the public hearing, we can certainly do that. So why don't we move on and do that? We're gonna just lay this aside until we're through with the public hearing that's coming up. So next would be the Westport Stone and Sand Performance Bond Draft.
Good evening, Anthony Ponabianco on behalf of the applicant, Westport Stone and Sand Solar LLC. We're here before you on November 15th, asking for an extension to the permits for a 6-month extension. And part of that extension request was granted on the condition, in part, that we provided a performance bond relative to landscaping. We had drafted with our company the performance bond, I believe, that you have before you, and have discussed it with Amy as well. So I'll entertain any questions that you have about the draft performance bond that we've provided.
So, do you know when your application, or do we know when the application first came before us through Westport Sand and Stone and Sand?
It's, is there a special permit number?
Yeah,
Reference? 2018?
Yeah, 2018.
2018. So, we've already exceeded the 3-year special permit longevity. We have previously extended it to, I don't know when, very soon, right? So, what would be helpful is if you could tell us why you need an extension. It would
Sure,
help
that-
us.
Sure, and in part that was discussed at the November 15th hearing, but I'm happy to discuss it. It in part was due to COVID-related issues and supply chain related issues, and additionally related to the solar industry in and of itself had some particular delays, but we don't anticipate any further delays. That's why we're only asking for a 6-month extension of those permits. We're ready to move forward on it completely, and I think the bond that you had asked for of $150,000 when you conditioned the approval of that extension last time we were here is appropriate, and we're happy to provide it.
Okay. So, planners, what do we have before us? What are your suggestions?
So, this was voted on the last meeting, that you would issue a 6-month extension for the special permit and the site plan approval for Westport Stone and Sand Solar LLC. It was contingent upon those two conditions, and to provide an as-built topographic survey of the site prior to the installation of the solar array, but after the installation of the erosion and control of the clearing. And they've agreed to both of those contingencies. So, recommend that both the special permit and the site plan approval be issued a 6-month extension, because the applicant has met the two conditions.
Okay, I would be happy to entertain a motion based on the declaration by the applicant that they've been delayed in their starting this process due to circumstances that they can't control, like COVID and supply chain issues.
So we moved, as Amy said last meeting, to grant a 6-month extension. So we've already approved that, and it was conditioned
Right.
on 2 things,
And they're here to
which they've
accept
done.
those conditions.
So I don't think we need to move again to grant the extension. We've already done that. Perhaps we need a motion saying they've met the 2 requirements, and if so, and you're attesting that they've done that?
Yes, they've said they
They-
would provide the as-built topographic survey, and they
Correct.
have provided the
They've
draft.
agreed to do
Yeah.
it, so
Yep.
So you want a motion saying that they've,
we're accepting their,
yeah,
we're accepting
Performance bond.
performance
yeah.
surety and the condition of providing an as-built topographic survey.
So if you want, all right, so I'll move that regarding the 6-month extension to Westport Stone and Sand Solar that we approved at our last meeting, contingent upon the bond of $150,000 and the as-built. We recognize that the petitioner has agreed to meet both those conditions. And so that extension is granted.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Next up is 202 Pine Hill Road Solar, file number 19-012SP-SPA-LID.
Good evening. AJ Snell, I'm with Greenback Renewable Energy Company, the owner of this solar project. We're here seeking an extension of our existing permits, special permit and low-impact development permits. This project, much like the previous one, has faced major issues with delays in procuring the equipment necessary for the project. Those delays have now been resolved. We've got access to the equipment we need. Construction contract has been signed up. We've been able to extend out, our other major contracts for the project, and expect to begin construction in February of 2023. So seeking an extension of those permits for that.
Okay, you've just sat through 2 other solar companies' process, and both of them have agreed since their approval to provide some surety.
Okay.
And so the question is, how much surety would we be asking you for an extension of the approved plan? And I think this site is much smaller than the last 2. And so I would think that a smaller surety would probably be sufficient, but anybody have any questions? Also, part of that would be to provide a post or pre-installation of solar panels, a as-built topographic chart with the roads, access roads, and the stormwater systems,
Okay,
just to make sure that they're working before you go to the trouble of putting all those things in.
sure.
So those two things.
And as far as the security, what's the form? Is it a bond acceptable or?
We would prefer cash.
Okay.
As I said before, if it were a subdivision, that is spelled out, but this is part of a special permit, and we really prefer cash, because calling a bond and then trying to go on private property that you don't even own,
Right, understood.
we just want you to have an incentive to finish,
Sure.
to do it and get your money back.
Okay.
So, 100,000,
Want a motion?
please.
I would move that we grant a one-year extension for the special permit, large-scale solar energy system and low-impact development site plan approval to Greenbacker Renewable Energy Company to December 14th, 2023, and require a surety of $100,000 and an additional requirement for as-built drawings prior to installation of solar panels.
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I need to get his last name, please.
Sure, Snell, S-N-E-L-L.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next is the BSC Group revised scope of work. I suggest we put that off until after the public hearing. Next would be approval not required, A&R file for 121, 127, 133 Gifford Road, Cabral. File number 22-005A. Request by the applicant for endorsement of a plan of land showing 3 lots for land located at 121, 127, and 133 Gifford Road, map 29, parcels 19, 19C, and 19D.
I think you have it's a paper copy of the A&R in here.
Yeah, if you could, yeah, thank you.
Should be attached in here somewhere.
For the record, Terry McGovern from Zenith Consulting Engineers and Land Surveyors, and we're in front of the board for this A&R plan. Move this all a little bit. On Gifford Road, which is one parcel removed from Route 88. And what we're seeking is approval of 2 conforming lots here on the west side of Gifford Road, which will both contain 60,000 square feet of land area and the required 150-foot frontage. The upper lot, lot 6, has some buildings on it that will be taken down and removed. The lower lot is vacant, and then we have a third parcel, which was shown as lot 8, which will be shy of the required 150 feet of frontage, which we've noted is not built to be considered a buildable lot without further zoning relief. Also segueing into your endorsement disclaimer underneath. There is also wetlands on parcel 8. Both lots 6 and 7 are all entirely made of very regular shaped lots. Again, both meeting the area and the frontage requirements. Fairly straightforward.
And this would discontinue the other way that you had made those 2 lots?
Yeah, there's some, at one time there was something that was sort of indicative of a cul-de-sac shape in here. So this new plan going on record would supersede that and create two original lots.
Okay,
I recommend that the planning board endorse the A&R plan. The first lot has adequate frontage, so does the second. And the third is labeled that it's not buildable until you have further zoning relief. They have more than enough uplands and 60,000 square foot lots. So I recommend that it gets endorsed.
and the buildings there that are going to violate the setbacks are gonna be removed.
Yeah, noted right on the plan, all to be raised.
What does without further zoning mean?
Well, potentially, they could maybe seek a variance to the frontage, but right now we've shown it is not buildable without further zoning relief. It also at Burr will get past conservation as well if they wish to build on it. So those are not, that parcel, lot 8 is not to be considered a buildable lot.
Any comments from the board? Then I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Sure.
Haven't we authorized the town planner to endorse Form A plans?
We still have to, still have to,
Approve them?
no, we don't approve them.
Right,
We have to vote to endorse them and to make the determination that they are not a subdivision per state law, so. And that's what we need. Somebody want to make a motion, or do we already?
I haven't seen this, Mr. Chairman. This was not in my packet at all. Sorry.
You have the name, I don't have the information with which I can make a motion. Yeah. I move we grant the approval not required for 121, 127, 133 Gifford Road. Is that sufficient as a motion?
I guess so.
I'll second that.
Okay. Just as an aside, this came in late, and we're required to consider these, and say yes or no, within, I think, 2 weeks, so.
21 days.
21 days, and the next planning board meeting is canceled, so we have to have
Have it now.
it done today.
Okay. So, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Very much.
Okay, next is the 6:15 public hearing for Westport Horizons Development Corp., Oak Ridge, file number 06-001 SPA-Major, continued from February 22nd, 2022, April 19th, 2022, and June 28th, 2022. Request by applicant for approval of a major modification to the site plan for Oak Ridge, a private community, assessors map 21, lot 4 and 4A, to eliminate the sidewalk along common driveways in place of gravel walking paths through the site.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm Attorney Mark L. Levin, the law offices at 138 Rock Street, Fall River, Massachusetts. I'm here tonight representing Richard D. LeBlanc, who is the former principal officer of Westport Horizon Development Corp. Just to remind the board, my client received approval to do this project, which was a first one for the town back in 2003. He, during that time, was the trustee of the trust and running the homeowners association, and completed the drainage, the side, the walking trails that were permitted at the end to be put with gravel, the retention ponds, community building, and the drainage. During the time that he was coming before you to change the walking trails from gravel to shells, he had a consensus of the then owners that they did not necessarily need the sidewalks as planned, and therefore only grass was planted and driveways were put in there at that time. It's a mistake on his part. He should have brought it before the board at the same time he was bringing you to change the gravel in the sidewalk, in the walkways to shells. He didn't, and subsequently, just to clean up the project, he brought you this amendment to the project. Now, just so you know, the entity that built this finished their project, or finished and was no longer involved for more than 10 years now. And 6 years ago, Westport Horizon was dissolved. But Mr. LeBlanc is still here. He wants to do other projects in the town. He wants to work and make sure that people know that he's not ignoring this. In fact, that's why he brought it forth to the board, not to ignore it, but to hopefully eliminate this requirement that was in the original approval. Now, he has been working on trying to talk to the board members at the trust and the management. He's gotten different contrary statements from time to time. In fact, I sent a certified letter out on December 2nd to the chairman of the board and also to their management, letting them know about this meeting and what we're trying to resolve. Now, I'll give you a copy of that letter for the records anyway.
Thanks. You all have it included in there.
Now, the position my client has is it's not impossible to put these sidewalks in. I mean, I have his engineer here who will explain some of the difficulties. I'm not an engineer, so I can't tell you the design and whatnot, but it can be done. I mean, the problem is, in the legal aspect of it, we need permission to go on the property. We need the trust to give us permission to dig up the property now, because my client has no interest in it. And from what we've been informed, a lot of the neighbors have, whether with permission of the trust or not, have installed sprinkler systems that go into this area that the sidewalk would be of their own, for their own grass to grow, and they've installed utilities in there. We would need permission from those people to first go on their property, and second, we need them to have their providers to eliminate that, because my client wouldn't want to take the responsibility of tearing up people's utilities, and cable, whatnot, and their sprinkler system they want. That's not his, he doesn't do that for a living. So the first position would be is if the board doesn't want to waive this condition, he would do that sometime next year. He's got another project that he's going to have nearby, and they'll have machinery out there with the asphalt machines, and they can do what they need. We do need, unfortunately, the permission legally of the right to go on their property and dig up the property now, and also we require them to remove their utilities. And in lieu of that, the board knows or may not remember, there had been a consultation fee that was provided to by my client to the board for review with us as the project went on. I understand it's somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000 that may be left. My client's willing to just have, in lieu of putting the sidewalks, to have the board, and he'll sign off that check to the trust, so they'll have that for their own kitty in the future. As an additional olive branch, my client said if you were to waive the sidewalks, he's willing to go in when he's doing the other project to come in and do some clean shelves into the walking path that this board had approved to be used, and we understand hasn't been maintained over the years. I mean, he's not walking away from the project, it's just that unfortunately, by not doing it 15 years ago, it becomes a problem now. And he admits that it was his fault not bringing before the board sooner when he was changing the walkways from gravel to shelves, because he had that knowledge that people weren't interested in sidewalks. He just neglected to bring it before your board, and as I mentioned, he's not trying to shirk that duty, even though I guess he probably could because the company's gone, but he wants to be a good neighbor. He's gonna do other projects in the town, and he doesn't want to ignore this. That's why he brought this forward to the board earlier this year. I do have the engineer here if you wanted to question him about how the sidewalks would be installed and what is necessary to do that. That would be his expertise.
Okay, couple of things. The amount of money that we have holding for consultant review is approximately $7,500 now. I think 15 years of interest has made it grow a little bit. We have thought about this, our planners have thought about this, and I think, you know, we're here to talk about just this part of it, but we also need from him an as-built. So I don't think we would be in the position to just release the $7,500 until we get an as-built. So I guess the question is, the plans required sidewalks. I know from previous meetings and meeting on the site with several of the people who live there and the trust people, that I think I could say that a lot of them were upset that they didn't get sidewalks because it says so in the plan. But some of them are really concerned what it would do for their driveways and for their sprinkler systems and for their lawns and everything else too. So the planners were thinking about this, and I would let them speak with potential compromise solutions,
So the compromise that we had, Amy and I had come up with, is that instead of, you know, because there are all those outstanding issues with installing the sidewalks. So there may be sprinkler lines or cable lines, or, you know, tearing up driveways, those kinds of things. In lieu of that, getting an estimate of the cost to install those sidewalks, and instead of installing those sidewalks, paving the paths. So instead of having a crushed shell, you have a hard surface path that is a little bit more accessible, a little bit more finished product,
ADA compliant.
ADA compliant through the neighborhood.
Excuse me.
This is just to try to,
I'm gonna have Bill speak to that, why he thinks that's not the better compromise.
Good evening, Bill Smith from Civil Engineering Concepts.
So are you thinking to just overlay the shell with the asphalt? Or are you looking at having a full, ground base, then the asphalt on top of it? Because it's pretty extensive work effort to do it, I'll call it properly, as opposed to just trying to throw a hardscape surface on top of that.
yeah, so the thought is to take the sidewalks and, however that would be installed, take that and put it where those paths are currently.
And that's,
And you would take you would get a cost estimate of those sidewalks and whatever lineal feet you get from that cost, you would superimpose that over the crushed cells. Or where those paths are currently. So not put it on the shells, but.
so, because I know the paths are quite longer than the actual, originally approved sidewalk lengths. So there'll be a significant increase in what I call the impervious surface. And probably not enough to significantly affect the drainage analysis that we have done. But,
Again, we're not engineers, so we're just thinking of ways to kind of avoid some of those issues that, because the sidewalks weren't initially installed, avoid some of those issues, but also make sure that some infrastructure is being installed elsewhere in the development.
Somehow he thinks
Mr. Chair,
asphalt's impossible.
can I just ask a question?
Yep. So, Manny?
I think probably one of the things that the plan is coming up with, like, we did a site visit out there. So you got some of the community areas, maybe not necessarily go in and pave all your walking paths through the woods, but come up with some kind of, like what they were saying is, so they're gonna get the cost estimate of what the sidewalks would cost. And maybe we could just revisit the site and say, okay, this is what we have to spend for the sidewalks. Where can we get our best bang for our buck? Like the community center had gravel, I guess, going to the building. It's really not handicap accessible. And I'm just throwing this out there from being on the site. But I think the residents probably would have some input too.
I'll let the engineer talk to me. This is, I know the legal end of it, I don't know the engineering end of it.
Well,
So,
Jim?
I think, just quickly, that the walking paths, although they're longer, we admit that by a long shot, it's much less fussy to be able to do that and try to, instead of working between the road, the landscape yards, the driveways, and the elevation differences, the driveway coming down the road here. How do you do that with the engineer would have to figure that out. But that's a lot of fussy work in a development that's already been done. And the walking path would be pretty simple. I mean, you just dig up the shells, put some gravel down and pave it. You have to do it, we need a cross-section, we need to know what they're gonna do. But to me, what do I know? I'm not a developer, so.
I understand, I do appreciate what you're asking for, and I understand that I have to let everyone else make their decisions.
And I'm not sure the homeowners want that, or what? We'll open it up to public discussion in a few minutes.
In a few minutes, the chairman said we'll open up for public discussion.
Okay, Mr. Levin, we're going to let the public
Oh,
talk.
sure, that's fine.
Why don't you take that discussion outside in the hallway? So I would like to open it up to the public or anybody who wants to speak for the association or individually.
My name is David Bork. I'm president till the end of the year. And as I mentioned to the board, that I'll be retiring from that. Just a couple points in overhearing the discussion. We've measured, we've had the path measured is about a half a mile of shelled paths. And some have been overrun by grass growing and so forth. And some are still functional with our efforts of keeping them clean and so forth, removing leaves. We just had about 100 to 150 feet of the shelled path going to the community center. And that was paid for us. It cost us $1,800. The shells were removed and placed in another area that we could use. So I think it probably would be a very expensive proposition. Plus, the paths are not connected entirely. There's one section of the path that comes through the backyard of my unit. There's another one that gets disconnected down on Windsor Street, Windsor Drive. And then there's another little section that comes up behind the community center, and that comes up another section of Windsor. So there may be, if they were to be interconnected where people would be walking. Right now, a lot of people that use the paths, including myself, we just kind of improvise as we go along. I did bring a prepared statement that I'd like to read regarding what Mr. LeBlanc had proposed and so forth. We received a letter. I think we gave you a copy of the letter. And it speaks to the issue of the sidewalks. Mark Allen will speak on that issue in particular. But I wanted to go review a little bit of the history of the offers, I should say, that Mr. LeBlanc has proposed. Back in October 21, I was approached by Mr. LeBlanc, and at that time I knew nothing about a sidewalk issue. We never had realtors, we never had building people, we never had the planning board or the town of Westport, salespeople, and including Mr. LeBlanc approached us that there are supposed to be sidewalks in the issue at Oak Ridge. The first time I met Mr. LeBlanc was at that time when he approached me in October of 21 and said, look, we would like to offer you half of the money that's being held by the town of Westport, which at the time he said was $6,000. We'd like to give you $3,000 to waive the rights to the sidewalks. I says, well, it's the first time I hear of this and so forth. From that point going on, the second offer was more recently, a couple months ago, when he approached me and said that, look, if if there isn't $6,800 there, I'll fork up the difference. So, if I receive the $6,800, I'll hand it over to you if you waive the rights to the sidewalk. Now we get the letter, from Attorney Levin and Mr. LeBlanc stating that they're willing to give us $5,000 in lieu of putting in the sidewalks. So my understanding of negotiations is that we don't go backwards. And I know that putting in the sidewalks would be a very expensive issue and cause all kinds of problems throughout the association. Just a couple things. I want to emphasize the 4 major points of the Cole report. I know this is probably drifting off to what the meaning of this meeting is, but Section 7, and I quote, paved sidewalks, handicap roadway crossing ramps, and painted roadway crossings have not been installed. As I gave the planning board in the past, the numbers for our proposal, which doesn't include utilities, irrigation systems, lawn fixing, landscaping, and all the issues that would come with it, just for putting in the sidewalks itself, a 3-inch base and removal of the soil and so forth was $28,000. Now, I'm sure that number could be a lot higher if they were doing the job in the right way. Section 10, the roadway drainage systems which outlets into the detention in place and appears to be functioning will require catch basin cleaning. This is a quote. Detention basin inlet and outlet cleaning and maintenance issues at the outlet control structure addressed. The trustees recognize that this is a recurring cost and lines should have been regularly cleaned and left in cleaning when the developer finished the project, which is around 2016. And the cleaning would not have been so costly because we found 4 to 6 feet of sludge and debris in those drains. We're waiting for a proposal on having the retention pond cleaned up and fixed up and getting it back to norm. Right now, it's getting pretty well filled with debris, sand, and swamp grass. The other quote from section 1 is minor cracking and driveway match joint separation observed for both Windsor and Crestview. And we have a contract to have the cracks sealed. That's costing us $6,000. It had to be postponed this year because of weather problems and equipment problems from the contractor. So, to sum it up, once again, we've had difficulty in getting this issue resolved, and we want to thank the planning board for your patience and offerings of how to settle this and so forth. Now, Mark Allen's going to speak on the letter we received, and he wants to address a few of the points of the letter that was sent out. Thank you.
Good evening, Mark Allard, board member, Oak Ridge. I'll probably have to reread this letter when they get back in, but I'll give you a preview. Oak Ridge board members, with the assistance of some of the residents, have spent the last 12+ months reviewing in detail the history of our development by looking at planning board minutes, records in the building department, the special permit documents, and the Cole report. In addition, we have gathered information from the homeowners who provided documentation of the construction problems in their units. All of these findings have been reported to the residents on a regular basis. Last Thursday, December 8th, we had our annual meeting. This was fortuitous since Dave Bork had received the communication from Mr. Levin a few days earlier, as he previously reported. The vast majority of our residents were in attendance, and Mr. Levin's letter was read aloud. Suffice to say, the response was spirited. Mr. Levin's statement that it has been more than 10 years since my client had any involvement with the development of the property was corrected. Specifically, on July 25th, 2016, an owner took possession of the last unsold unit. Dave has already provided you with information regarding Richard LeBlanc's involvement with Oak Ridge subsequent to July 2016. He never finished doing the driveways, so those weren't done until later in 2016. And whatever else he did or didn't do subsequent to the Cole report. The Oak Ridge residents unanimously and vigorously reject Mr. Levin's proposal. It is blatantly clear that Richard LeBlanc is negligent in not building sidewalks, handicapped roadway crossing ramps, painted roadway crosswalks, and in some units not installing integrated emergency call, telephone, and other communication systems, all of which are required in a special permit for an independent living facility. Sadly, all these areas of neglect are critical for an over 55 population whose mobility and health challenges increase significantly as people age. Consequently, the infrastructure challenges of constructing sidewalks is now owned 100% by Richard LeBlanc, with the exception of the irrigation systems. These were installed by owner choice and not part of the special permit. That is, removing utilities, landscaping and portions of driveways, building the sidewalks, and then reinstalling the utilities while ensuring the driveways and landscaping are repaired to an acceptable condition are all Mr. LeBlanc's responsibility. Also, it is important to emphasize that residents only own their domiciles. All the other property in the development is considered common area. Only the Board of Trustees, as fiduciaries of the trust, can authorize any work in common areas. We expect that Richard LeBlanc will submit a plan that has been created by appropriate professionals with an estimated cost and to do so in a timely manner. Only then will the Board of Trustees consider alternative solutions to what never should have happened. Thank you.
Okay. So we have before us the request to change the site plan to remove the sidewalks. We're not sure whether the association or the homeowners trust or whatever it's called would allow him to put the sidewalks in if he agreed to do it. And so I think the planning board is left with a decision to make with regard to his request to remove the sidewalks from the site, from the special permit. How do we decide? Do we say it's on the plan, you gotta do it? And what if the homeowners say, no, we're not gonna let them do it? So, what is it? I mean,
Could I permit to read some of mine, what I read already for the benefit of these gentlemen?
say again?
Could I just read part of what, since
No,
they
we
were
don't
here?
Excuse me.
We
So,
understand.
We don't want to hear it.
I think they probably know what your position is already, and we're not here to try to arbitrate between you. We're trying to make a decision whether we request him to complete what he agreed to do in the first place or not. And we can do that. That's the only issue before us, is the sidewalks. So the planners were trying to come up with an alternate solution that wouldn't disturb all your front yards and your driveways and all that stuff. It may not be a workable solution. You may not want it. He may not want to do it. He may say, I'll do the sidewalks. But somebody's got to tell me, do you want sidewalks or not?
We want our residents to be safe. They are, I'm not minimizing this, is very important. People are mostly over 70 now. Some of them are recuperating from surgeries, some are recuperating from heart surgery. People need to have access to be able to in the neighborhood and walk safely. And there's other features in the special permit beyond the sidewalks, which are safety features, the handicap crossings. And this is a gross negligence. And we made our point very clear. We expect a proposal taking into consideration the sidewalks, and dealing with the utilities, as I said, with the exception of the irrigation, dealing with the driveways. And at that point, we're in a position to be able to make some decisions. You know, we don't have enough information right now.
Well, then I think that you're gonna have to discuss with them directly, because I don't see how we can be of any help in this discussion. We can say, you gotta do the sidewalks, but I don't know if that's sufficient. I don't know if you want that. And in discussing with all of you, I have no idea whether you really want the sidewalks or not. And that would be very helpful to us to know whether or not we should be requiring the sidewalks because it was on the plan, or I know you have other issues with Mr. LeBlanc in the whole process. We cannot get involved in that discussion. I mean, we can't do anything about it. And that's really an issue between your association and he.
I understand that, and I think Michael and Amy's suggestion might have some merit. I don't feel I can speak on behalf of the whole residents right now, but at least having a paved walkway, which in many respects, as they've indicated, is disjointed, is not a circular walkway.
I understand.
But at the same time, it really would probably be less total distance than the sidewalks would have been. But it must be a secure surface similar to a sidewalk, just as you indicated. And that may very well be sufficient for the community. It at least allows people with wheelchairs and walkers to be able to access, like now they can get to the community center because we took care of that problem. So, you know, that may very well have some merit.
Okay. Mr. Bullard?
Yeah, I think that there's two ways for us to look at this. And I think the planning board is capable of looking at this situation in each of these two ways. One is by what we permitted, and that is we permitted a project with sidewalks, and we reinforced that decision a meeting or two ago when we said that sidewalks are a good thing to have in developments, and we should reduce the number of units that where sidewalks are required from 20 to 5, because we think sidewalks are a good thing to have. So we're in favor of sidewalks. And so one way we look at this is the developer promised sidewalks, and the developer should deliver sidewalks. And if, as the attorney said, the developer wants to do other projects in town and finds himself in front of us, and he hasn't fulfilled the commitment to build sidewalks on this project, well, we're gonna remember that. And a developer who doesn't deliver the commitments that he promises is, you know, not someone who should be doing projects here. So that's something that, you know, he should keep in mind if he wants to do developments in Westport, is you promise to do something like sidewalks, you should do them. So that's one way we should look at this. Now, the second way to look at it is, why are you doing developments? You're doing them for the residents who are gonna live there and what their needs are. as you have eloquently pointed out. And that means listening to them and working out how to meet those needs. And so if the developer finds there's a better way to meet those needs than building the sidewalks by focusing on other issues, whether it's crosswalks or pull cords or the paving parts of the walkway, I don't care, I don't live there, you live there. You know, if the developer figures out with you, by listening to you, what is a better way to do that, and works with you to do that, and you all come in here and say, hey, we all worked it out, it didn't happen to involve the building of sidewalks that tore up our sprinkler systems, then what we're gonna hear is, hey, here's a developer who met the needs of the people who live there. And that's an important consideration for us to keep in mind if a developer comes and says, I want to do another development in Westport, because then we say, well, here's a developer who meets the needs of the people who live in the place he built. That's an important thing for us to keep in mind. So those are two ways that we go about listening to things. One is, what did you put on paper? I put on paper, I'm gonna build sidewalks. So build them, that's what you put on paper. But the other way to look at it, which doesn't necessarily end up with the same answer, is I'm here to meet the needs of the people who live there. So those are two ways to solve this problem. They may end up with different answers.
Totally understand that, and as I said, I think we can gather our residents together. We have a pretty good representation here tonight, because it probably tells you how important it is to folks to live in a safe community. I think one of the other things that we've said before, which is important to recognize, that just because most of us aren't working doesn't mean, in fact, we probably get more FedEx, Amazon, UPS, Rescue, on and on and on, all day long. And it's a little challenging. You try to get them to slow down, but they're on clocks, so we have to dodge them as we're walking down. But in order to be able to have paved walkways now, which are pretty much, they're not used obviously by most people, and they're clearly not accessible by people in wheelchairs and walkers, which we have on a pretty regular basis. So if we can gather our community together in short order, we probably can within the next couple of weeks, and then put another proposal similar, very similar. It sounds like we would have to walk our property and figure out just exactly where it makes sense, and that might be a resolution.
So I think the other thing that you folks should do is to review the Cole report, and don't just look at the sidewalks because you know you don't have the sidewalks. But the other issues that they brought up that are part of our special permit, you should complete. And that includes the crosswalks and the pull strings and all of those things that I know that are in the bylaw and are required.
Thank you.
So just to be clear, I mean, we have the sidewalks on one hand and we have the paved trails. Are you willing to consider both?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So then it's up to you people to come
I'll
back.
just need a copy of what I've written to him, but that's no response, so.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, one of the things that I struggle with, and perhaps the board struggles with, is that we talk about these sidewalks in the abstract. And I went out and I walked and I met with some of the owners and walked it, and I have a good sense of what the place looks like and what it would mean to put sidewalks in on one side, and particularly to have a clear path that leads someplace, that allows people to cross the street safely, walk, get down to the community center, so that the pathways become, or the sidewalks become functional. And we, I sort of picture that in the abstract, but there's no plan. And the idea that this was approved some time ago, and I know it's I believe it's a condominium. I don't know, when we say the sidewalks are on people's land, I don't know that that's true. I don't know that I don't know if there was, in the approved plans, was, in some of this, we may be able to have the planners go back and research. Was there ever a right-of-way for these streets? Are these things just purely driveways? That is, they sit on, the street itself sits on someone's lot? Or was there a right-of-way for the street?
I've reviewed the plans several times. I believe that the land is all owned by the association or the trust. And
I know they're private, and that I'm not sure how the ownership is, but I assume that there's common ownership in the roadway.
yes,
Is the roadway the width of the pavement, or is the roadway 40 feet wide?
it's the width of the pavement. I think it's a driveway.
Yeah.
Oh, it is a driveway.
Can I help clarify?
Yeah.
The driveway.
Could you please come up to the,
So it's basically not a roadway like a typical subdivision where you would have a 40-foot wide right-of-way that envelops the asphalt. It's a driveway, and it's in part of the common open space for the subdivision. So it doesn't have its own designated footprint or property. And it's owned by the entire,
Do people have lots?
no. No, they have a house, and then they have a limited common area
Okay,
around that.
I understand.
but did you want to finish about the construction of these sidewalks? I mean,
Well, to see, Bill, you may be able to add some clarity here if there was a plan of the sidewalk, since I guess it's all in the common area, no matter what it would be, since it's in the common area, what would that look like? How long is it? How close to the road are you going to put it? And I know there's some very steep driveways and, that type of thing.
This plan was what was submitted where we were actually removing the sidewalks. You can see it in the darker cross-hatched area around one side of the driveway system. And that was what was originally approved, and that we had asked for the board's blessing to not install that. So that can give you a general sense as to where the sidewalks were. The walking paths go through the back part of the property as well.
Thank you.
is there anybody else?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
My feeling is a waiver on the sidewalks, that we couldn't give him a waiver without everybody coming together and saying, we're gonna give you a waiver. So I think in everybody's best interest, maybe come up with some other design of a sidewalk that everybody can, it'd be more cost effective to build. Looking at the situation where the place is built already versus when it was supposed to be built, while it was being built. So maybe you can get a functional sidewalk into the project that all the residents can utilize, versus trying to adapt a walking trail. Maybe, it might even be less footage if it's, you know, something that comes, it's all common area, they might get something that works a little bit better. I don't think we could give them a waiver without the people saying, yeah, we don't want the sidewalks.
Yeah, exactly, that was my point. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do.
I mean, to us, mostly, if you don't come together, what we could say is, no, we don't give you a waiver, and it's done.
We're willing to meet with the representatives, that's not a problem.
You know,
You know, my client comes into the concept of the stone, and sometimes it takes a little while to think of something else, so I have no problem meeting with people, I mean,
But I mean, I think in the precedents, like my other colleague said, we're for sidewalks, especially in this type of community. I mean, this is what we're trying to develop.
this was a mistake,
So-
100% was an error, he should not have let it go to this point. It was basically that at the time he was controlling this organization, was running it, he had the consensus they weren't interested, so he just didn't bother, and he just continued to build. Unfortunately, that, you know, they planted grass instead of where the sidewalk would be.
So, from the planning board perspective, if we just went by what's on paper and we said, okay, build the darn sidewalks. I think if we said that and made that part of this public hearing, both groups, the builder and the homeowners, are gonna be upset because they don't want it the way it is, and he doesn't wanna build it the way it is. But that's what would happen if we say,
That's all we could do.
that's all we could do. So, if you wanna come back with a changed sidewalk, and you say, we'd like to change the sidewalk that's required from what was on the paper to this, we would certainly listen to that, but you'd have to get buy-in from everybody, because you still need their permission to go on the property, since you don't own it anymore, to do this. So, Jerry?
I'm Jerry Catino. I live on Petty Lane. I do not have anything to do with living at this project, but I was involved to a small degree at the very beginning. I attended a number of the hearings when this project was being proposed, and my initial concern was that I didn't think that this project was appropriate for that bylaw, because the bylaw was for assisted and independent living, and it talks in there about congregate housing, and besides my years on the zoning board in town, I also was the director of the housing authority in town, and so I had some knowledge of housing and so forth, particularly at that time, and I felt that it really didn't meet the purpose designated in the bylaw, but it was pursued, and I kept bringing up the issue of congregate, and that was meaning at the time, and if you read the bylaw you'll see some of that, to provide housing where people can get together, they provide services so that as a group they might dine together and so forth. It's not that at all. But to appease the situation, I'll call it that, my recollection is that they had proposed some walking trails, not in lieu of sidewalks, just simply to have some extra walking trail for the people to be able to get exercise. So in order to get the congregate piece in, they decided to build a gazebo. And the gazebo was going to be the congregate, where people could congregate. A real stretch in my opinion. But anyway, so I just wanted to point that out, that there, to my knowledge, there was never any direct connection between trails and lack of sidewalks. Secondly, the attorney had indicated about homeowners association. Well, back then, when this was being built, there was no real homeowners because they hadn't bought the properties yet. They weren't ready to be buy. And to me, that is a problem within the process. How can you have a homeowners association when you don't have anybody owning other than a developer or maybe a couple of sales? So I just wanted to kind of put the light on it about this whole thing about congregate and services for the people. So it's not just physical buildings that are structures or retention ponds or anything like that, but there's also the basics of the services. Now, I know they have a community hall, they're able to meet there, and they do, and I think that's all positive, but I just wanted to indicate about my attendance at those hearings, and I commented on that a few times, and brought up the whole issue of congregate housing being fitting into the bylaw. So I'll just leave it at that.
Jerry, I appreciate that. I also was in some of these hearings. I wasn't on the board yet. I was attending planning board meetings. And my parents had been in a place that I thought this bylaw was going to be like. And in what I testified in the hearing as well, and I tried to point out that for this kind of setting, you really need to have a place for communal meals and pull strings and doorways that are 36 inches wide and all these things that you really need. But at the time, the planning board, I think, was unfamiliar with the details of that, and they were more concerned with this, with the stormwater site and the roadways and all that stuff. And it's part of the reason I got on the planning board. So I would like to continue this meeting in lieu of making a decision to a time when the engineer can get together with the builder and figure out an alternative to what they're talking about. And then talk with the homeowners and see if you can come to a conclusion of what they want. But you still need to finish the other things on the call report. Even though you might think they're small, I mean, they're things that you need to do.
One of the reasons that we did finalize the asphalt plan and the pieces of the culvert report was the sidewalk was the big issue. We wanted to try and reach some resolution with that before we submitted something that would be complete. But we can take care of that, and the sidewalks will just have to be resolved.
So, Mr. Engineer, how much time do you need to come up with something?
Well, I think we need to meet with the representatives of the homeowners association. We need a couple of months if we can.
Okay, so what do we have for a couple of months?
Somewhere in March work, or March?
End of March?
We have March 21st at,
You come back. We lose our without you.
No, we're gonna continue.
We can go April meeting?
you have April 4th and April 18th. April 18th at 6 p.m. at that.
Okay, so I'd like
You
a
know what, I'm
motion.
sorry, 6:15.
6:15.
Mr. Chair, I move that we continue the public hearing on Westport Horizons Development Corporation, Oak Ridge, until April 18th, is that the date, at 6:15?
Yes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Same to you. Okay, back to the 2023 zoning bylaw amendment.
Do I have that?
Okay, we're still meeting. If you could take your conversations out in the hall.
That highlighted stuff, I don't see it anywhere.
We don't have that.
Okay. Hello?
I
Out.
don't know if Michael didn't give that to me.
I don't think,
It's not in here.
I couldn't find it.
This is over there.
Okay. So do you want to wait until do you want to try to revise the flexible frontage as we sit here? Or do you want to have them redo it?
I think we should just consider all of these, and then we need to reserve, what I'd like to do is to just look at all of these. What I suggest, Mr. Chairman, is that we look at all of these and then decide up or down, should we reserve space on the warrant? And then, and then we can, perhaps in our first meeting in January, actually, we'll all look at that in the interim in time, and we can look at, some wordsmithing of these things.
Yeah, so, well, excuse me, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yep.
That's fine with me. I just want to mention that there are a couple of additions that we got from the BZA. So we did discuss with you all during the working group.
Jerry, why don't you come up and sit at the table,
Yeah.
because you have a hard time hearing us, so.
So during the working group, we talked about the flexible frontage piece and some amendments to the solar bylaws. Jerry requested that we add in a definition for owner in the accessory apartment section. That is section 9.5.
Could I clarify that, please?
Sure.
Because we, as a zoning board, didn't bring that issue up. What it is the detached apartment says the owner has to live in one of the units. Well, it so happened that we recently just got a situation where the LLC is the owner. And it made it kind of complicated. So we had the town council review it, and he came up with definitions. So what it's Attorney Jeff Blake of town council that's actually recommending that. And we as a board voted this past meeting. This only came up in the last few weeks. So the attorney has come up with, I believe it's a proposed definition, I don't have them with me right now, proposed definition for owner, and specifically taking into account a corporate entity, and what the zoning board, the only part we kind of had in that was, should we be the, someone as part of a corporate entity, and by the way, the same thing goes with trust. Or should it be a 25% ownership, a 15% ownership, a 51% ownership, a 50%? We discussed that, and we kind of just thought maybe 25%, but not for any particular reason. Well, actually, there were some reasons, but I couldn't explain what they were now. So it's really.
Supreme Court already said corporations are people.
Right. So who's gonna live there? The corporation?
Well,
The definition is up here.
So,
Right.
is that the new proposal?
Yeah, in red.
So anyway, let's see, what that is. But it's coming from KP Law, not us directly.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
I mean, we sent it over, but
Yeah.
we got it from them.
Well, what if it's in a trust?
Same thing.
And the problem is the trust can have beneficial
That's
owners,
correct. Beneficiary.
but the trust, the reason that people have trusts is that it is not made public who those people are. So, what do you do about trusts?
As far as I know, he handled that in his proposal. This is, I actually brought up the same issue because you have beneficiaries in the trust and you have trustees in the trust.
Well, the trustees in a trust are known, but not the
But they're
beneficiaries.
But the trustees may not be beneficial owners.
They may not be.
Right.
And you don't, and you're not required to let on to
And
who
you're
that
not
is.
required to let anybody know, so.
And
And what do you do about, you know, I had this in my wife's family, they had a little cottage, and there were 7 cousins that owned this 2-bedroom cottage together. And finally, they had to go to court to force a sale, because nobody would.
well, the other alternative that I suppose that we change the whole thing and don't require the owner to be there. But now you're talking about building 2 houses on 1 lot.
Right.
And renting them out, so, you know, we're back to nothing, so, anyway, I haven't read this one, but, let's see, ownership of a natural person. I don't know, I don't see him covering trust there, but we definitely talk about trust. So, anyway, that's why this is being brought in, and that's why the lateness of it, because it just came up. And then, there was another issue of correcting a typo.
Mhm.
You saw that, right?
So I would think that we need to send that one over.
well, you got this from our, the town's
Attorney.
attorney? I think that does it. I mean, our house is owned by a trust. I mean, that's just what you do in estate planning.
Yeah.
Who's the owner of the trust?
We don't have to say.
Yeah, my
He
wife
can't
and.
tell you.
Yeah, no, I'm saying, is it a
Yeah.
trustee, is it a beneficiary?
Yeah,
You know?
but,
And by the way, this is not relevant to us right now. This really is only when it comes time to enforce the rules. I mean, when they come before us, you get approval for this. We just read them, what the bylaw says, and, you know, it's up to them to.
Well, there's nobody living in it yet.
Right, there's no, well, the one that.
This is
we have
in the
now
house.
isn't even built yet.
Right.
Okay, so,
So,
But most of the applications you see, someone said, well, I'm gonna build this and we're gonna move into it, my kids are gonna get the house, I mean, that kind of story. At least the applicant is saying
At least that's
that
what
he's
they
gonna be,
say.
he's gonna be one of the people who live here.
and that's what everybody thought.
Right.
When we passed it at town meeting. But now, and this is particularly important because more and more corporations and LLCs are getting involved in home ownership for things like short-term rentals as a business. So I think it's. time
Tiverton,
we
did you
just-
go to the Tiverton public hearings? They just had 2 hugely attended public hearings on this.
On short-term rentals.
Yes, and they're trying to come up with ideas about how to regulate it, and they're trying to, you know, the owner has to be, on the property. Good luck.
Yeah.
well, Jerry, you may have just nailed it by, instead of focusing on ownership, focusing on who lives there, so that because a corporation who's running a VRBO or something doesn't live there all the time. But a trustee of a trust, like my wife and I, live there all the time, right? So I wonder if the way to skin this cat is to say that the owner of the way to define the owner is partly this, but also partly that must live there 6 months of the year, or, you know, even 4 or 5 months of the year, just as a way of getting around you're not a corporation running a VRBO or something like that.
I would suggest that we ask the attorney, as you
Yeah.
said before, to straighten out maybe
Yeah.
some of the issues.
Well, I suggest we send this to the Board of Selectmen to send back to us for a public hearing. And we can always change it after the public hearing.
Yeah,
In the same with this other one on flexible frontage.
Yeah,
I'm okay with sending it this way to the select board. It really needs some wordsmithing,
yes.
but we can do that after the public hearing.
I agree with that completely. And I think in the accessory apartment, since I had this up, you know, the problem with the language, in purpose and intent, it says, provide homeowners with a means of getting rental income and all that stuff. So it says, so the topic is homeowners, and then they said, oh, well, we got a corporation. Well, then we start to define owners. And I think, as John suggested, and you know, if we said, for the purposes of this bylaw, owners are a person who, for the majority of the year, will live in one of the two dwellings, or something like that, just for the,
We'll give multiple ways. You're either on the deed,
right.
or you're an owner of the corporate entity that owns it, or you're a trust, or you're the person who
Or
lives
beneficiary
there
of
all the
trust, right.
time.
Right.
But, you know, so you can qualify various ways.
And in reality,
It's
think about it,
enforceable.
You're the zoning enforcement officer.
No, no,
Right.
You are at midnight.
Yeah.
Oh, who are you?
Yeah, yeah.
It's gonna be your job.
But you're not Marriott, right, running a
Well, that's
VRBO.
the whole point.
That's the point. You wanna just make sure you're not Marriott running a VRBO.
So anyway, that's how this came about.
That knock on the door is not the zoning enforcement officer. There's some cop responding to a complaint about, hey, there's 27 people in here and 11 cars in the front yard, and
Yeah.
what's
Well,
going
that's-
on?
Well, we actually
We
had
have-
similar right in this town.
On Braden Point
Right.
Road, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they used to, they rent out, they've come before us a couple of years ago,
So were you gonna do
to ask us to do something about
This-
RV.
Yeah, the last one.
And the place is listed for sleeping 17 people.
Can't be
It's
the
a
first people
three-bedroom
to solve this problem.
Septic system.
And then the second one that he sent was, it's just a small typo.
Yeah, it was, the word proprietary, I think, is supposed to be the word, and there were a couple of letters missing in it. That's my recollection. So anyway, I just thought I'd come up with you any questions about it.
Okay, no, I think we're good with it. So, the solar energy system bylaw.
Thanks,
So,
Eric.
All set?
Yeah.
Thank
Unless you wanna listen to the solar stuff.
Thanks, Jerry.
What section of solar, what number?
9.6.1. Get to it up here so you can. So in the purpose section,
Page 16. On your right.
Yeah.
Yep.
we added some language in recognition of a need to try to achieve some balance with agriculture and solar installations. Jim and I also discussed adding in some language for agrivoltaics elsewhere in these revisions that we'll get to, but that's what this piece is here.
I had my eye on that code. I was gonna
If it was summer, it'd be.
Go outside, I realize.
So I think the addition is pretty well wordsmithed. I think
Yeah.
that
Move on. All right.
page 20.
The next one we have is item H, number 4. This is for clearing area. And so this is where I was talking about, Jim and I discussed adding some language for agrivoltaic systems. So in addition to cleaning up some of the other language of section or subsection 4, we also added that we should allow for increased clearing for agrivoltaic systems in recognition that they're going to require increased usable land area. They'll have to be more spread out.
now,
Farming.
do you have somewhere that they're higher?
Higher.
Yes,
Yes, the height of structures.
Oh, the height of the structure?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, it says,
That's in there somewhere?
yeah.
And right above,
72 inches
Yep,
at
right
the
above
lowest
it,
point.
2A. I can go to it.
so there'd be 6 feet. at
6
the
feet at the,
lowest,
6 feet at the low end.
at the low end.
There get some pretty tall sheep and goats under that.
Yeah, probably goats wouldn't be a good idea. I
No.
don't think. They would eat the thing.
All right, we'll move to fencing. That is section K2. It's under design standards.
What page are we on? Oh, you don't know, because you're not on the iPad. K2?
Page 24,
On the iPad, it's page, yes.
24,
24?
yep,
Section 4?
See, mine's
section 4 at the bottom,
here.
paragraph, no, next to last.
That's 22.
22?
I don't think this matches.
Oh, you
The
read-
applicant shall provide surety either through escrow or other form. Is that
No.
the section you're looking at? That's still on solar.
Yeah, there should be another section here for fencing. This was a common condition, and it's not in your packets, I guess. But this was a common condition of approval for solar facilities to require fencing around the photovoltaic or agrivoltaic system, and those systems shall be surrounded by fencing of a minimum height of 7 feet and a minimum of 6 inches above the ground. That's to allow passage of small animals. So that would be item.
What section is that?
It would be under, I guess it didn't make it into the packets, sorry about that, but it would be K2 is where I put it.
Okay.
But that's in our current regs, right?
It is not.
Fencing is not in the current regs?
It's a condition of approval in a lot of these projects, but not in the solar regs.
I thought it was, but maybe it got left out when they redid the zoning bylaw.
And I'll make sure I resend that so you all can view that language.
Is that it?
We have 1, 2, 3, 4 more. Section K4, this is under design standards. This is subsection 4 is visual impact. And we revised this section to require surety for site revegetation and adequate drainage. So you can see them proposed changes, revisions, deletions.
Should the surety be approved by the planning board or the building inspector? You have.
Says both.
It says both. I think that's
Through the-
hard to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think you should just strike the building inspector.
Just be the planning board.
The building inspector hasn't been, at that point, would not have been involved in the
Right.
review.
Okay, next we have subsection 9.
7.
How about, how about 8? Utility
connection.
connections?
Oh, sorry, I have different numbering because the fencing didn't get.
Well, you have one on,
So- But the,
pertinent structures, number
Yeah.
7, battery, adding battery
Yeah.
facilities.
oh yeah, that's correct.
And then utilities.
And then underneath that, section 9, utility connections. This is being added to ensure that electrical wires are going to be installed underground to the greatest extent feasible.
You know, putting the transformers on pads rather than hanging them on tall telephone poles is a real benefit visually.
Yeah, I think if the electrical transformers are going to be approved by the planning board, then it could be, their location could be left up to your discretion.
And then Q, financial security for removal. You're striking on municipal property.
Yeah, so we just struck out on municipal property to make this a general requirement for all projects. For all projects that are being decommissioned, so not just on municipal property.
And this one says by the building inspector or the planning board.
Yeah, that's so that is in the original
Right.
bylaw, and we can strike that from here.
Yeah,
If you.
I think it needs to be struck because it says building inspector or the planning board. And again, as Bob says, they're not involved when we're approving. He's not involved while we're approving these things. And then
Last is consultant review.
and is that how we should word it? Or should it be
So
an
the-
electrical consultant? A solar electrical consultants, a solar consultant?
We can call out specific trades, or we can, honestly, we could leave the language in place and not necessarily have to call out specific trades, just because it does say and/or other technical consultants to advise, probably here, Jim, as well, strike the building inspector, and/or planning board to review application plans and documents, the application phase and construction phase. So I think, other technical consultant leaves it open to.
A way to, some wordsmithing suggestion here, if the sentence read, again, this reads, the building inspector and the planning board shall establish, but say, if it read, the planning board shall establish a procedure for engaging, strike the A, professional engineers and/or other technical consultants to advise. Is this the way are we?
Yeah, that's what it says.
Is this the way it is?
Yeah, it's crazy.
So we advise the building inspector?
It's,
It goes
it's
over
in
well.
here.
Yeah.
But I think, no, it needs to be changed. And I think the way that you're starting out is good, but I think that the electrical, or the consulting electrical engineer or inspector should be part of how consultant review goes, but they could work with the building inspector when they're installing this thing, because.
Well, we have an electrical inspector, but.
Well, that was part of the problem.
He's doing houses and we need someone who, when they do the big cable connection into the network,
Who's doing that?
the only municipal body at work at that point is the planning board, right? And so, I think there we need to say, if we made it professional engineers plural, we could get electrical or power distribution engineers or someone, or, I don't.
Well, I think you could say that you need all those, that we're gonna set up a structure where the planning board designates these people to advise the planning board during the application period,
Right.
and advise the building inspector during construction.
Yeah, just like control
Right.
construction,
Right.
so the utility has
Yep.
to have the same kind of professional engineer
So you got that?
versus the building and wiring inspector for his
Thing.
permit. That's kind of what happened to us over there.
All right.
I think all of those are worthy of being on the warrant and us tackling them this coming year.
Yep. Easy peasy.
One of the, if you look at, we've had a bunch of experience, but if you look at the Borrego Main Street installation, there, the site work really is not very well done.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, I think there's an attitude of, these solar panels are all propped up on legs, we can run them up and down and up at hills, and all of that's okay. And we do it everywhere. Yeah, that's true, but then establishing meadow agriculture underneath that when the site is just filled with hundreds of little potholes. And when you go out and look at the site, what's growing? All of those potholes are growing. What are they growing? Not, you know, the field cultivars that we're, not the $1,200 a seed stuff. What's growing in there is all blown in, or the birds bring in the seed habitat from the adjacent wetlands, and they're growing sedge communities, and they're growing all little wetland communities, and you get 100
Honeysuckle.
little pocket wetlands growing underneath there. And they try to mow it, and they can't mow it because it's all muddy, and that's the kind of stuff of, you know, the mindset is from the electrical power generation standpoint, it all works perfectly. From the idea that we're gonna have agro cultivation beneath that, or we're going to have, you know, reestablish native farm field vegetation, it doesn't work well at all. And that's why, you know, I think getting a look after you rough grade it, what does it really look like before you put the things in? That's, when you get that rough graded, is this thing just all pockets, or is it really look like something before you put the panels in it? Because, you know, I think they can seed it again next year, and they can seed it again, you know.
So these revisions will have the surety now too, just built into the decisions instead of having to make a condition.
The consultant's really gotta be, like, I'm not saying full-time on that site.
Right.
When they're pulling stumps, they don't need to be, but the consultant needs to be involved. Cause I can guarantee you, 75% of these never spent $1,200 an acre on a seed.
Right.
That's why it's not growing.
If they spent $1,200 on the whole site, I'd be
Right,
surprised. So, no, I think this is a good stab. Every time we do it, we try to button it up a little bit more.
And I think with the, you know, when we're talking about the ground mounted, I think we've got to kind of, like, just like a subdivision, it's underground. Because Borrego came in and they lied to us, a main road. They said the utility was making them do it that way. Well, really, you know, you drew two little circles on the plan that got by us that it was overhead, but the bylaw says it's supposed to be underground.
Yep.
So it needs to be underground, simple as that.
Well, and if they can't do it for some reason,
Well, the only reason they can't do it is cost.
yeah.
That's the only reason.
But if there is some circumstance, it's up to you all to make that, you know, it's built into the language that you all would make that determination. You'd have to bring some
Well,
sort of
it's-
evidence and.
Okay,
It's the
so
same thing with the culvert.
I'm sorry.
I would like to move this thing along and
Yep.
have somebody make a motion to send these zoning changes to the Board of Selectmen for their approval to then send back to us for public hearings.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we send these articles to the Board of Selectmen for inclusion in the warrant for the Springtown meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. BSC Group, revised scope of work.
Yeah, we just got our revised contract from Russ on, I think it was Friday. You can see up here, I won't read through it, but we've got a revised scope of services and just some highlights here. There's going to be a 6-month project timeline. Again, I guess just for the record, we had our contract with BSC Group revised to include the entirety of Route 6 for our rezoning initiative on Route 6. It was between Fall River and Route 88, and now it'll go from Fall River to Dartmouth. So there'll be a 6-month project timeline, 12 working group meetings. There'll be 2 community meetings for public comment, or 1 community meeting, and 1 business and property owner stakeholder meeting. There will be a planning board meeting and 1 select board meeting. They will prepare all of the materials for town meeting. I don't know if we want to ask them to also present at town meeting. And obviously, the big ticket item is that we need to find an additional $20,000 in order to pay for this contract. It's a $20,000 difference. Jim, I know well, you've mentioned that we could potentially get some ARPA funds for this. Do you still see that as something that's feasible at this point?
ARPA committee, I think, is meeting tomorrow afternoon.
Okay.
So, if you give me the details on an email to me,
Yeah.
I will present it and ask for the additional 20,000, because they've already approved the 35.
Great.
So, I think that's fairly easy. Okay, planners reports.
Sir, this time?
Well, mine was mostly recommendations for the admin items on tonight's agenda, so I don't have anything other than just reiterating that there's a harbor water study meeting, on Friday at 10 a.m. to go over the latest memo from Weston and Sampson for the groundwater supply. Other than that, it was all related to tonight's meeting with the admin items.
So, can you give us just a synopsis of what that report from Weston and Sampson says for additional work? And should I be talking to the ARPA group tomorrow afternoon to see if we can get them thinking about that?
I think we're probably gonna need additional funds for that. He did, I don't have the report in my hand at the moment. He did supply a breakdown of the funding that it would require for the different line items for the project to move forward in the next steps.
Well, wasn't it like an additional 30,000?
It was about 30,000.
So in the report, they've identified a series of locations for, well, based on the underground geologic features, they identified a series of locations that will probably, or would likely deliver the most yield for water, and 3 of which they have recommended. I don't have a map here, but they have overlaid that with properties that are publicly accessible, and that's kind of how they came to their conclusion. They have other well locations identified that could potentially provide a better yield, or it's closer to the homes that it may benefit, but it's on private property, so there's potentially some issues with access. And
Well, the other issue will be a lot of the public accessible land that they've itemized is owned by the Westport Land Conservation Trust. And they're coming to the meeting. Tina Schmidt is coming.
Good.
And somebody else, and they're not happy about having those cross-action, the fracture lines on their property.
Okay.
So even though Jim Hartnett said we ought to include that property because, we do a lot of work with them and there's gotta be some way we can work around it, they are pretty adamant that when there's a conservation restriction put on land, it is forever. So, we'll see.
Yeah.
But that'll be part of the discussion on Friday morning.
That's the gist of it.
There's conservation restrictions and there's conservation restrictions. I mean, there are conservation, there are conservation restrictions that allow walking trails, that allow activities, in
Drinking water should be one of them.
and in our neighboring town, and there are, I would say, there are lots of places on the Cape in which, you know, there are water supplies wells sitting in big conservation areas. And,
So you're coming on Friday?
I am.
Good.
Good, yeah.
Okay. All right. Next up,
Do you have anything else, Amy?
No, I do not.
So, I pulled together a bit more of a detailed planner's report, so, I will go through this pretty quickly, because it's 8:30 now, so. Just for the record, on November 29th, we held a work group session, the minutes for which are forthcoming, so those will be available at our next meeting. As we talked about here today with some of the zoning bylaw revisions, we focused mostly on solar and flexible frontage. These are gonna go to town meeting. And then we had a more general conversation about how to encourage conservation/open space subdivision developments as opposed to a series of A&Rs after A&Rs after A&Rs. Also during that meeting, we talked about having a public engagement session during town meeting, to just get some general ideas on long-range planning. And I asked, as a follow-up to that, I asked Jim Hartnett and if that's something that he would consider. He said that he would not recommend hosting that to the select board, just due to all the things that are going on during town meetings. So he doesn't want to add another thing to the mix. He did say he would bring it to the Board of Selectmen for a vote, and it would also need to be approved by the town moderator. Know if we want to have any discussion about that, or?
I think, having sat in a lot of town meetings, David Coles always wanted to have time in town meeting to explain whatever big issues are before the town. But it's never been allowed, I don't think. Steve Forrest will allow it, unless it has something to do with an article.
I think there's a nuance on this. Not to do it within the body of the town meeting, but to do it in assuming that we meet in the high school, to do it in the lobby, to have stands or something set up there, and just to sort of engage the public in a more broad sense, not on the floor of the town meeting, but in the lobby of the town meeting. Now, most people are just gonna rush by that, but if we did a little press ahead of time, if we built awareness, people may come and engage in a conversation.
So that is the format that I asked Jim about, and he wasn't supportive of that format. I will say though, I mean, this isn't the only venue for it. You're not gonna have as big of a reach if you do smaller events, like there's going to be for example, the Winter Festival in the Annex. You can do those kinds of things on a smaller basis. Sure, you won't have the same reach, but there are other ways to try to generate those data points.
But 300 people are gonna walk by you at town meeting, and here we would get 30.
I hear you. Yeah.
So even if you only engage, a tenth of the people, or I guess it would be the same, but if you engaged, half the people, you would have reached you know, a larger audience, and maybe there's,
But sometimes if you have information,
handouts or
just hand
take-ups.
those. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, at a table and just,
Yep,
people pick up those things and sometimes they read them.
Yeah, and there are all kinds of, you know, when we had the high school vote, there were all kinds of handouts.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. I wonder if you had, you know, there's 10 or 15 handouts that everyone grabs as they go in. And if we had a one-pager handout that had like 4 questions with blank space. What do you like about Westport? What don't you like about Westport? You know, just think about the 4 questions with some blank space. And they've got all night or all day to,
Yeah.
when no one pays attention to every article there. And they're sitting there, and they can scribble something on, and all you have to, and it says at the top, hand this in
Yeah,
in a
drop it on the
special
way out.
box on your way out. And all you have to do is say it's a blue box or something. And it's got some explanation. This is going to the planning department, so we get an idea about what people feel.
Yeah.
So that it's self-instruction, moderator, no one's got to say anything about it, doesn't have to, and it's just something that people, so I take Jim Hartnett's point that you don't want to take away from it, but it's a self-explanatory thing. And, you know, maybe half the people put something on it.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
I will follow up with him. I'm definitely supportive of it. I mean, the more ways we can try to get out in the community and see what people are thinking and actually get some data to say, this is what, you know, this is the vision here.
Yeah.
The more ways we can generate that data, the better.
So if you run that by Jim with maybe what you think the 3 or 4 questions are,
Yeah.
I understand what he's saying. You don't want to take people away from that, so, you know, keep it simple. I think as Bob said, it's such a difference in terms of how many people are there. You know they care enough about Westport to come to town meeting. It's a really good group of people. And it's different from every other gathering.
This is kind of more of an admin item. I distributed a list of, an
Yeah, that's
updated
very
list
cool.
of solar array facilities. Thank you, Nadine, and for helping me out with that one.
So don't we know how big these are? Why do we have some that are estimates of how big?
So this is a spreadsheet that I did not create this myself. I found this on our one of our drives. I did not go through each plan approval and to verify this information. I did discuss quite a bit of it with Amy and Nadine about the status of some of the projects, but as to the particulars, I can't
Lucy
speak to that.
also did a lot of this as well.
So, we had done something, Michael, maybe before you were here, where if you total up the megawatts, and this does not include any megawatts like the solar panels on my house, you know, small systems. But you total up the megawatts that are generated or to be generated when the ones that haven't been constructed. And then you figure out what Westport's needs are. And we came up with some statistic like we generate or will generate when everything's constructed, I think it was 150% of what all of Westport's needs are.
Mhm.
So I think Manny talked with, the people at Borrego, or the utility company. And you said that we're already generating more than we use?
Yeah,
What happens also is how it gets into the grid.
yeah.
Because one of the things when they've been telling us, this is medium voltage lines coming out, and people in their head, because when power companies talk high voltage, they're talking about the high tension lines.
Right.
So these lines that are buried in the ground are a lot of voltage, they'll blow your arms and legs off.
Yep.
You know, but, so what the grid does, well, I guess it's the federal government, tells the grid, you can only turn up to this point, because the only way the solar gets into the grid is it has to overpower what the grid's putting in.
Right.
So some of like the outskirts where it's coming in from way out there, it's gonna create problems with our infrastructure, because it overpowers the grid there. The grid's not happy about that either, they're kinda like, has to fight to get in. So then, when they're saying they're putting medium voltage out, they're putting, in order for that to get in, they have to overpower what's already in the high tension wires for it to get in. So that affects some of the, like when lights are flickering, a lot of, it's not because you don't have enough power, it's because you got, like, LED lights have sensors in it, and there's too much juice there, that's why they're flickering.
And that's one of the, is the move, the idea of moving to an electrical future versus a burning carbon future. In that move to that future, the economics hinge on being able to generate green electricity, that is the offshore wind and the solar, all of this stuff. Now we've got a non-carbon source for the electricity, and when there's a lot of it, it's cheaper. My wife and I were in Denmark in June, and we were talking to people about there were large offshore solar arrays, and we asked about what's it doing to the electrical bills, and we were told that in some windy periods, the government pays, the money flows back into the people from the amount of electricity that's generated in the offshore winds. And it's really dramatically dropped costs.
Yeah.
And the idea of someday so much is generated that it actually reverses your meter, and they actually get, when you get your bill, there's a day when it's the electrical cost that day is negative, and you get a discount.
That happens to me all the time.
Yep.
My meter goes backwards all the time. I haven't paid an electric bill and probably paid 3 months electricity in the last 10 years.
So does it negate the delivery charge for the electricity too?
Yeah, the meter spins backwards.
Yeah, but the delivery charge is, I guess it's per kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
it's
does.
all,
It's
it's combined all on your meter.
Yeah.
So,
Because I'm just looking at my bill, and the delivery charge is higher than what electricity costs.
so I think, if you go back and look at what the recorded, all of these projects have some size, megawatts associated with them. And I think there's enough, when we took a stab at this before, we looked quickly at, there was published data on what does the average household use and that kind of stuff, and we know there's 66,000 odd household here. And when we did that number, it looked like we already generated more electricity than we consumed.
Right.
So is there a way to we have a lot of solar and these three people who are gonna be building big ones. Is there a way for the homeowners in Westport to benefit from some of this? Like you're talking about in Denmark. Of course, those systems out in the ocean are probably government owned.
They're national systems.
Yes, these homeowners are benefiting.
Yeah, those guys, yeah. But
Well, I mean, think of all the homeowners are really benefiting, because the town gets.
Yeah,
just-
and the town gets payments
Right.
too.
they get piled.
Yeah, they get it just as much as most, well, I'm talking like on the large scale. The landowner, the town gets this, most cases, the same amount of money, so
So they
we are
get a
benefiting,
pilot,
it's just
yeah.
what do we use it for?
So that's the other thing, do we need to put into the bylaw that they must agree with the town to provide a pilot? Or is that automatic because it's cheaper than paying a property tax?
No,
How does that
that's
happen?
something, yeah.
Who negotiates that?
Town administrator. But is there anything that requires them to go to him to do that? I think they do it because it's cheaper than paying
Well, with the
current
equipment, with the
value
whole-
of the
With the personal-
equipment,
personal
personal
property.
property tax. But then, if you do personal property tax, you get a lot of money up front, but then after 20 years,
Appreciates.
it's worth nothing, so you get nothing. And a pilot is meant to start here and gradually grow.
Let's keep going.
So this is a quick one. After the subdivision regulations were voted to be amended for reducing the amount of lots required for sidewalks and subdivisions, we've updated that and filed them. So those are available online now. Next we have the Buzzards Bay Watershed Municipal Mini Grant Award. I went to the select board meeting last week and they voted to approve the $30,000 grant from the Buzzards Bay National Estuary Program. This will be used to get a conservation restriction at 559 Main Road, so over at Schnell Creek, right? Snell Creek.
This is the Petty property
Yeah.
that we suggested to the planning board that they give the 61A right of first refusal to Buzzards Bay.
Yeah. So we have a contract in place now. Buzzards Bay Coalition has closed on the property and they're working on fundraising to secure the conservation restriction. Regarding our application to the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, MEMA just submitted applications to FEMA last week. So we'll see what happens with that.
Do we have an application in?
Yes.
So this is, our application is being submitted
By MEMA.
MEMA
So
to
they
FEMA.
apply on the basis of batches. So, however many communities apply through MEMA, they submit one application for the state to FEMA.
Okay.
The Board of Selectmen signed a contract with Roger Fernandez, Fern Corporation, the other week. And so I believe there will be a meeting, potentially this week, maybe next week. I haven't heard anything from Jim, to get him up to speed on the Route 6, sewer extension.
Who's he meeting with?
Roger Fernandez,
Yeah. Who's he meeting with?
Jim Hartnett, and not sure who else. I'll follow up. I assumed that some members of the planning board would want to be at that meeting. Bob, Jim,
Probably members of the infrastructure committee.
Yeah, I'd like to be at that.
Okay. John, since we have, do you wanna be at that meeting or?
No.
No. Alright. I'll touch base with them and I'll coordinate it with you all. The Route 6 corridor study that Serpent has done, this is a transportation corridor study. They just published a draft of that study and I circulated that with you all, I think yesterday. And they are accepting comments on that document. And they are due December 31st. So if you have comments, you can send them to me and I can forward them to Serped, or you can send it directly to them, however you want to do it. It's fine with me.
Okay, so this corridor study for Route 6 is, the study is for Westport and part of Dartmouth, up to Crossroads.
Yes.
And they presented this at the Serpent monthly meeting last Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
And I told them I hoped that, you know, whatever Mass Highway is developing can be, take into account this change in zoning that we're working on. And the Serpent representative from Dartmouth, who I think is on the planning board, suggested that we get our planners in touch with their planners and try to collaborate on what Route 6 is gonna look like in this area. And amazing that they're talking about regional working together, which is almost unheard of. So if you could be in touch with the town planner in Dartmouth.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, I think also something that we might look into consideration on that too is with, looking forward into this, the watershed permit that we're talking about here. And needing that to be regional. We should get into some discussions on that.
We should. Absolutely good idea.
And I think, you know, it's kind of key. I know they got a lot of meetings going up with Lakeville too on the nitrogen stuff going on, and I've been hearing a lot of things going on, but I don't know if there's some way in this watershed permit what the state's obligations are gonna be. Because when you look at the map, you know, our watershed goes all the way up to Crapo Hill,
Yep.
which is the Dartmouth, New Bedford refuge landfill. And then you look at what, you know, you wanna blame our septics, but you look at the streets that cut up our watershed, you know, 88, 177, Route 6, 195. I've been working in that watershed for almost 35 years. Done a lot of private and, you know, stormwater projects. I only know of one stormwater project for Mass Highway or Westport or Dartmouth. And that's what they just did at Lincoln Park. I mean, there's not one, and all of that dumps into
But
our river.
they had to do that sidewalk for some, why did they do that sidewalk? Because that's not part of the plan.
That sidewalk, they did that sidewalk because of, I believe it was the DPW, but there was some fatalities up around Walmart, and they pushed them. So when they went in to do the sidewalk, there was an initial contract to redo the intersections. And what they did was, they got opera money to put those sidewalks in. The state said, all right, we'll put the sidewalks in for you. It wasn't easy for them to get them to do, but they did it. So when they were constructing it, one of the part of the contracts was repaving. So when they finished the sidewalks, they pulled out the repaving, and the resident engineer and the engineer out of the office said that the reason they pulled it out was because they're gonna totally reconstruct it, the whole Route 6. So that's why they went overlaying the road at this time.
But I thought part of the sidewalk was for ADA compliance because of all the people who live down in Lincoln Park.
No, it all had to do with fatalities next to Walmart and I think they came out of the Capri.
Hmm.
They had, there was 2 or 3 of them, and that's what, had nothing to do with Lincoln Park.
Okay.
All right. Next, we met with, I don't know how to pronounce her last name.
Courtney
Roca. We met with Courtney Roca. She's the Southeast rep for the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. We met with her yesterday to discuss funding potential for a couple of different projects through the Climate Resilience Committee. One was a project for a climate change ambassador. This person would do PR, education and outreach, but a big thing is they would do coordination of the Climate Resilience Committee activities. She seemed to think that if we had a good program design in place, that it would get funding potentially. So
This is per a proposal from Jeff Canton and David Cole.
correct.
From which part of the committee are they on?
Yeah,
Outreach.
engagement and
Engagement.
fundraising.
Yeah.
So that was hopeful.
Yeah, so she was very receptive to the idea of that engagement piece. So Jeff will probably have some more updates for the CRC at our next meeting.
Is it true, though, that MVP is turning down projects like the LET because they are subject to flooding within the next 50 years?
Part of that, we sat in on after it was declined, we sat in on a meeting with Courtney, and she went over, she has a whole list of things, and that project, rated 50 out of 100 for all their different things. You know, every little thing gets 3 points or something like that. And so there's several things that she told me. One is that part of that neighborhood is going to be, it's in the FEMA floodplain. So they don't want to put anything in that's going to be flooded.
So that anything we looked at in the East Beach vulnerability study, and they're not funding retreat.
No, that's what I had.
And so they're sentencing anyone who lives
Right.
anywhere and will live there for the next 50 to 75 years.
They would pay for outreach on how to teach these people that they should retreat.
To say, good luck to you.
Right.
And
That's
so
crazy, 'cause
the recommendations we had for raising East Beach Road, for armoring the power lines that service Tripp's Boatyard, everything else.
They might do something with the power lines. I mean, that's different than.
Well, there are different funding streams too that you could potentially access. So the Building Resilient Infrastructure Program, you could potentially get funds for something like that through that program. We just don't have the hazard mitigation plan in order to apply for those kinds of funds.
So two
Courtney-
generations of people who are gonna live there
Right.
are gonna live there without any assistance.
Courtney said that
That's what I
their
said. That's what I said to her,
their
basically.
organizations or their mission is more oriented around adaptation. That's what
No,
she told
not
us.
towards adaptation, towards retreat. Because we're talking about adaptation. Adaptation is how do you raise the road. Adaptation is how do you armor the infrastructure. Adaptation is how do you deal with the wells and against saltwater intrusion. They're not talking about adaptation at all.
Mhm.
So there's several things that the LET didn't do. It didn't have any environmental justice. So
Yeah.
it's not on the state's
Right.
environmental justice map. Number two, it's gonna be inundated. Number three, they don't pay for infrastructure. and that's what this is. So I met with her too, with Michael and Amy, and they would consider something on the harbor thing, but they would like to see it more in effort to ascertain whether wells all throughout town are gonna be inundated with salt. That's what they just approved, a big one for Plymouth. The town of Plymouth is gonna do a big, huge outreach to everybody in town to go test their wells and to find out, you know, cause they think that the salt is gonna migrate
Yeah.
like 3 miles inland, underneath in the aquifer. And so, if we could, it's really convoluted how to think like they think and try to do it, and I think that Jeff Canton and David Cole have hit it right on the head. But, you know, they're not gonna do the small things like we wanna do, like fix East Beach Road, or do the LET, or do any of those things, so. But on the LET, you know, we've been encouraged by Joe Costa at the Buzzards Bay National Estuaries Project to apply for that same grant that MVP turned down for the LET.
Yeah.
And he's very encouraging that they would pay for something like that.
With the saltwater intrusion into the harbor areas wells, Courtney also said that it should be more of a kind of a model program that could be replicated elsewhere, and also have a significant public engagement piece along with it. So it couldn't just be funding a study, it would have to be a little bit more expansive, like Jim said, potentially looking at maybe further inland.
Maybe we could do it for all the like neighborhoods up and down the East Branch,
Right.
as well as the harbor, so, I mean, we've got a dozen of them that are gonna be in trouble too. And that would be something I think that she would fund. And I asked her about marsh mitigation. You know, would they fund some thin layer deposition on our marshes so that they don't all disappear before somebody comes up with a great idea on how to save them? And she thought that that was kind of a stretch because CZM and DEP won't allow it. I said, well, we've had some discussions and they're thinking about it now. And she said, do you really want to be the first ones? I said, yes, we do. So I think that's a possibility. The other possibility is to do an outreach and investigative thing on really how to do agrivoltaic here in Westport, and do outreach to the farming community and to all these solar companies that are coming in front of us, and do a small but targeted thing with perhaps the consultants that already did this in Charlton, Massachusetts. It is now allowed by our bylaws, so. The deadline is March 15th or something like that, 30th.
I don't know off the top of my head.
And the one thing that we asked her about, and that's the reason that Michael asked her to come, was what Leroy Kendrick has been doing in Tiverton in terms of having a wastewater license program in Westport that would help the Board of Health identify where all the septic systems are, where all the cesspools are, which ones are Title V, which ones are pre-Title V but not cesspools, and those kind of things, which the Board of Health has no ability to do, or the money to do, and she thought it might be something, but it would have to be some kind of outreach too, and maybe if you included water wells and the contamination from salt into that mix.
Couldn't that be into the watershed permit though? I mean, the watershed permit could work on that type of stuff.
And the other thing
I think
is,
that's what the
would they
state
pay
wants us
for,
to do.
would they pay for a comprehensive water management plan, which is what we're gonna need to do the water permit? And she said we might, so.
Yeah.
I think she said we might.
What's that? Oh, for the,
As long as there's there's part of that that incorporates climate changes.
mm-hmm. All right, so just got a couple last items here. We had a meeting with Bob, David Cole, myself, Amy, with Betty Ann Mullins from Bay Coast Bank. She's worked on a couple of, many housing projects, including she worked on Nokochoke Village. Is that correct, Bob? So she talked to us a little bit generally about what kind of barriers we can reduce for development in the Route 6 corridor. I think the takeaways were less restrictive zoning in that corridor, which is something that we're working on. She also talked about having RFPs on town-owned land. I don't think we have any town-owned land in that corridor that is developable.
For one little piece.
It's all wet, yeah.
Just one little piece.
I think so.
Yeah.
A couple of acres.
Yeah. So unfortunately, that's not really an avenue, but she did arrange a meeting with Ken Stein, who developed Dartmouth Woods, to give us some more, to talk to us a little bit more about potential for multi-unit development in Route 6. So I forget when that meeting is, I think next week on Monday.
Monday at 10.
Yeah. And then finally, kind of, this dovetails with that a little bit. I've been working on developing a socioeconomic data profile for the town. So this is using updated 2020 decennial census data and 2020 American Community Survey data. I'm going to use this data to compare Westport's socioeconomic profile to Bristol County, Serpent area, and comparable communities, so Tiverton, Lakeville, a couple of others. And I'm pulling this together to start having a database to try to answer some larger, more long-term planning questions, namely for this, it's going to be answering what's our place in the regional economy, and what kind of policies that and expectations should we get put in place in the near future and longer future in order to realize some of the goals that we've set for ourselves. So if we want to play a role in the offshore wind economy, how do we need to position ourselves? How do we need to position ourselves to make sure that we're not missing the boat, so to speak, when that kicks off? So I'm working on that when I have time.
Okay, thank you. Correspondence, we have some from the Zoning Board of Appeals. And then we have the minutes from November 15th.
Mr. Chair, I've read the minutes, find them here. But I want to say, both in the assistant planner and the planner's reports, it is, to quote Emerald Lagasse from Fall River, we have kicked it up a notch here, you know?
Man.
And everyone, Nadine, Amy, Michael, this is, we're doing an awful lot of work, and it's really good to see.
Thank you.
So congratulations.
Here, here.
And all of you out in TV land, if you're still up, You should be very proud of what this team is doing for you. I read the minutes from our November 15th meeting, and I think they accurately reflect the work of the planning board, so I would move we accept the minutes of November 15th, 2022.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And when's our next meeting?
January 10th.
Huh?
January
January 10th.
10th.
Oh, I thought you said February 10th. Jeez. January 10th, okay. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.